Well, we are here today because of those who have gone before us. This fall, our church will turn 89 years old. It's pretty young, isn't it? So our church is going to turn 89 this fall. But the purpose of the church is not to exist as an organization on paper. The purpose of the church is to fulfill the mission that Jesus has given us. But celebrating those who have gone before can inspire us to do what God is calling us to do now. But things were done differently about 90 years ago, as we can imagine how much the world has changed in that time. In August and September of 1935, Burlington First Church of the Nazarene was organized under the leadership of Reverends E. and Ora Turner. Shortly thereafter, the church purchased a storefront in the corner of Ash and Osborne. And about 3 years later, then they purchased the building on Washington and 7th, the one right there by Snake Alley. There's a beautiful building that we're grateful we don't have to use all those steps anymore. And the church was there for about 30 years. And most churches, the beginning of a church being organized is a whirlwind. Things change. Things move quickly, but once the church was established there on Washington Street, it brought stability, but that stability did not create complacency. Because about 30 years later, 1968, the church moved to this building in which we now reside. Now, some of you have been part of the church for decades, and you can name a lot of the previous pastors and leaders. Some of you have been newer to the church, and you can't even name a previous pastor or some of the leaders. See, the point is not that we know the names of those who have gone before, but that we recognize we are here because of those who have gone before. This can help us remain humble and grateful for their efforts while inspiring us to be the followers of Jesus that leave a legacy for the next generation. So we can think of how do we measure our legacy? How do we do that? And one of our first areas we go to is that of statistics. And stats have value, but they are limited. And the difficulty is trying to find the right metrics to evaluate. And so one of the easiest things we do is we talk about attendance. But we know there's a difference between attendance and engagement, but it's a lot easier to quantify attendance. For instance, our last year, we had an average worship attendance of 94, an average discipleship attendance of 60. Those are meaningful, but they are limited. Another thing we could measure is the number of teams or groups that we had and volunteers. We had 37 different ministry groups and teams this last year and 374 different volunteers. I say different volunteers, somebody can fulfill multiple positions, but the fact of the matter is those are things we can measure. But what does that really mean for us? And then on top of that, we can look at how social media has changed the landscape of things. And so we have presence on YouTube and Facebook. But I do want to highlight one thing today. We, in January of 2022, we started a church podcast called Extraordinary, God's Uncommon Work and Common Life, where what we did is we interviewed individuals from the church, previous pastors and leaders in the church, and community leaders, looking at how God works through his people. And we ended the podcast December of 2023 with the 100th episode, which is really cool to think about. But those episodes continue to exist on YouTube as a record of God's faithfulness. So I want to say thank you for those who participated, but also it was a lot of fun and inspiring to see those stories come out and how God works through us. But we have all these stats that we can talk about in person and online, and then we get to the corn ministry. Because the corn ministry is in a different stratosphere of anything else. It's growing, and I hope you can participate with that. But like our social media posts are always crazy, have a crazy reach with our corn ministry. But one of the things is we have become a church with the reputation of being the church that sells sweet corn. We started selling in 1998. The process of picking, bagging, and selling is honestly, it's something you have to experience to fully understand. It's fun, it's intricate, it's hard work, and it brings glory to Jesus. And thank you to the 74 of you that volunteered last year to help make this a success. I want to remind us that every penny we receive from the sale of sweet corn doesn't stay here. It goes to missions work or local compassionate ministries. It doesn't go to keep the lights on. It doesn't go to pay bills. It goes out. And so there's no overhead cost. Everything's volunteer and donated for the church. And so every penny goes towards that. So this last year, we raised $21,278.10 with 10 days of selling. So in over 25 years, our total is $248,763.15. That's crazy. I like sweet corn, but I didn't think people liked it that much. But that's the things that we've been able to support ministries throughout the world on every continent and in countless states and local groups here in town. And we've been able to do it because of sweet corn and people of giving to the mission of Jesus. But we have other ministries in this church. We have our clothing ministry, or our food ministry, Be One Neighbor. And this last year, Be One Neighbor served an average of 47 houses with 11 different volunteers. And this ministry could serve even more with more volunteers and more financial support. We had Be One Kind, which sought to impact our community with the random acts of kindness through things like water and cookies and gas and groceries at Thanksgiving and Christmas in a way of randomly blessing people. And it's fun to hear the stories of people trying to turn down the random act of kindness because people don't expect that in our world. Be One Family continued to organize events for our church, with one of the most popular ones being the Easter brunch and egg hunt. But today our picnic is by Be One Family. We say thank you to those who participated with that, and I hope again that you can continue to come to the picnic. Be One Bless is our clothing ministry. It's the second Saturday of every month. They served an average of 237 people every month over the course of the year. If you haven't checked out our clothing ministry, please do. Second Saturday of every month, so it was yesterday. But every piece of clothing is clean, it's organized, so people can shop with dignity. And there's really, the only question we ask when somebody comes in is, how many people are you picking up for, just so we can keep a record of it. There's no name, we don't get any personal information, there's no income requirements, it's about serving people who come. But since its inception, this ministry was led by Charlie and Nancy Corrins. And this last year in June, Charlie went home to be with the Lord. And so Nancy continues to serve. But this ministry needs more leaders, more volunteers. So I ask you to prayerfully think about serving in this ministry. We had our men's and women's group that continued to meet monthly with them going to their district retreats as well. Our First Impressions team continued to greet people and help them feel welcome when they come into church. I'll tell you what, if you're not greeted when you go to church, you notice. But I also want to make sure we recognize that we come to church not to be served, but to serve. Well, that's why Jesus came to earth, and that's what he calls us to do. So our call is to serve each other. And so even if someone didn't greet you as warmly as you would like, maybe we can serve each other and fulfill the mission Jesus has given us. Be One Missions continue to be extremely active and do a ton of things. They distributed the corn money. They went on a mission trip to Appalachia Reach Out in eastern Kentucky with 8 individuals going. And we also did a bunch of crisis care kits this year. We did 24. There's 12 bags in each crisis care kit, right? 6. Oh, okay. Well, my math's going to be different then. But so each crisis care kit is just a banana box, and there are 6 2-gallon bags in each box. And these 2-gallon bags have personal hygiene products like toothbrush, toothpaste, comb, and those types of things, as well as a little toy to distribute when there's some type of disaster. And we were part of a global church that does this, and we send them to Maryland, and then they get distributed around the world, whether that's stateside or globally. But we did 24 boxes, and so there were 6 in each box. So that means we have 144 individuals that we can bless with these crisis care kits. Did I have my math right? 6 times, yeah, okay, yeah, so. All right, just do 12 by 12. But anyway, that's we got it done. So thank you for that. But Our youth continue to meet, to be active, with 4 kids going to camp, 4 kids going to district retreats. They participate in the Burlington Cleanup Day, Earth Day. I think I said that correctly. In April, ways of just being out in the community and serving. Our kids continue to meet on Wednesday nights in the school year, Sunday school, and then lesson during the sermon. And, it's fun watching our kids grow. And make sure we recognize our teens and our kids are groups that we say, we need to invest in our youth. We need to make sure we actually follow through with our words and do that and invest in them. Our landscaping team also took care of our property with flowers and mowing. And landscaping is one of those jobs where people only notice if they're not happy with it. But the mowers particularly save thousands of dollars and making sure of volunteer labor. Those who plant flowers do a good job of making our property look beautiful. But when we think of our property, we recognize that a lot has happened. In the last 2 years, our property looks a lot different. Now, some of the things you can't necessarily tell too much. 2 years ago, I remember we got the new roofs. Thank you, insurance company, for that one. But there was a huge pothole on the other side of the edge. Now, to be honest, my boys are disappointed because when it rains, it was really fun to go play in that pothole. But every driver is happy that pothole's not there anymore. We had flooding in the parsonage in the basement, and we were able to put new carpet in, remove asbestos, and do more to help the water situation in that. We remodeled the edge. And so this last Tuesday, our church is a voting precinct. And so the election chairs, it's usually the same people. I didn't tell them about any of the renovations yet. This was the first time we've been voting since we've renovated. And so I went over and checked on them. And before they even greeted me, they said, "This is awesome." It's the kitchen, the edge, the bathrooms. It's a facelift that was much needed, and we're very appreciative to have that. You also may see that there's some exterior work going around the parsonage and church garage to help the water drainage situation. And it's not yet complete, but we're moving towards finalizing those projects, and so we can really address those issues and move forward. Another thing that happened that I find really, I don't know if interesting, but really encouraging. In February, our church leadership took an assessment, a church health assessment from a group called Natural Church Development. And this assessment they've done with over 80,000 churches around the world across all types of denominations and traditions. And so we have 8 categories that you get graded on. I don't know how it works, but all I know is the results. And the highest score was inspiring worship, which was in the 90th percentile of all global churches. We have an amazing worship team. I want to say thank you to those who are on stage every week and just participating in that. So yes, thank you. So here's one of the things I want to recognize. You see these individuals on stage giving their time and effort. Make sure you thank them. But there are also people up there that you don't see. Now, just like landscaping, if they don't do something you like, you notice. But make sure you thank them too. So also, I'm going to say Becky Johnson's not here. She's out of town today. But I want to say thank you to her for office administrator. She does a fantastic job, and we're just so grateful and blessed to have her. And as well as our janitor, Brian Landstrom. You may not know him, but he does a fantastic job, and I just want to publicly thank him. And then our church treasurer is not a staff position necessarily, but it deserves recognition. And so, Lisa, I want to say thank you for that. So those are just some of the things I want to make sure we highlight as we think about this last year. But a temptation pastors have is to either sugarcoat reality or speak in cliches. As followers of Jesus, we believe in the goodness of God, but the only way for that statement, among others, to not be a cliche, is to honestly own the current reality. In many ways, this last year was really, really difficult. And there may be times to dissect issues and determine responsibility, but my point here is just to recognize it. To cast blame in this moment right here misses the point. Casting blame doesn't own the reality. It shifts responsibility to others. When people are hurting, one of the best things we can do is to give them space to hurt. Expecting others to process the same way I do is unrealistic and often unhealthy. This does not mean we approve of non-Jesus behavior, but we recognize that Jesus made each of us unique. When I expect you to think and act like me, I impose unfair expectations on you that will often lead to disappointment and frustrations. We can be tempted to focus on grace and forgiveness when somebody else should extend us grace and forgiveness. I imagine more of us spend time thinking about the grace somebody else should extend us as opposed to the grace we should extend someone else. We might say this is the natural way of thinking. Well, another way of describing that would be non-Jesus, carnal, or even sinful. When we fail to extend grace to each other, what tends to happen is we entrench ourselves in our position, create separation and disconnect, and allow Satan to get a foothold in our lives. The sad reality is that the more we entrench ourselves, the more difficult it is to find a way out of the situation. But in the fall of 2023, some of you may remember the sermon series was on the book of Malachi. And when Malachi calls the people to repent, he uses the first person plural pronoun. He doesn't use I, you, he, she, they, or them. The call to repent is us. It's we. The community must return to God as a community. We tend to overemphasize the individual components of faith at the expense of the community. And a consequence of overemphasizing individuality manifests differently among individuals, which tends to create greater separation. When the community components of faith are neglected, both the community and the individual struggle. I will face certain struggles that seek to separate me from you, and you will face certain struggles that seek to separate you from me. But then we look at Matthew chapter 7, and we had this challenge from this last year of, are you a pebble or a pig? A pebble is someone who is being turned into a pearl, while a pig is someone who is trampling the pearl. If we are not careful, we can focus on the imperfections of others while ignoring our own. When we come together as pebbles, desperate for the saturating grace of Jesus, the kingdom of heaven manifests among us. Paul and Silas also show us in Acts chapter 16 that praise opens prison doors. No matter our situation, Jesus can overcome. By acknowledging our reality, we can proclaim victory in Jesus without being cliche. I believe the power of Jesus can bring victory in any situation. The issue is not if Jesus has enough power. The issue is if we are willing to submit to the Holy Spirit. Both the one being turned into a pig and the one who is trampling pearls face adversity. Praising God in prison, as Paul and Silas show us, recognizing we may face less than ideal situations. Adversity is something we will all face, and we will all often face it more than we would like. We're going to face it. We have to come to grips with that reality. The question is, how will we respond to it? Now, many animals have a similar response when storms happen. The response is to flee, hide, or both. Cows are a prime example of this. When a storm is coming, cows run in the opposite direction. Now, no matter how fast a cow runs, it can never outrun the storm. Instead, running away from the storm usually means that the cow gets caught in the torrent of the storm for even longer. If it would have remained still, it would have had less time in the storm. A close relative to the cow is the bison. And bison have a much different strategy when storms approach. Instead of running or hiding, bison run straight towards the storm. By running into the storm, bison are subjected to the storms for less time. So they spend less time in the storm. But an important part of this strategy is that the bison are careful not to be swayed by the wind of the storm. In doing so, it means that they would be in the storm even longer. The cow and the bison provide a vivid example on facing life's adversities. Both endure it. Only one has the resolve to face it. We have contrasting pictures from the free and wild bison to the captive and domesticated cow. But when facing life's challenges, don't run, don't flee, don't avoid, don't hope it goes away, don't pretend it doesn't exist. Face it head on. But facing on adversity is not about bulldozing others. Following Jesus is not about trying harder or just finding the strength to persevere. But while there are other truths we might be able to glean from this, there are three concepts that come to mind. The first is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul tells us not to lose heart. For even though we are fragile clay jars responsible for the treasure that is the good news of Jesus, God will bless our efforts and He will sustain us. James chapter 1, we are challenged to consider it pure joy when we face trials, and everybody goes, ugh, right? When we face that, we don't like that. We often grow most when we face adversity, and God uses our suffering and difficulties for His glory. In 1 Corinthians 13, we have the love chapter that's commonly read at weddings, and here the Apostle Paul defines love as patient and kind, not jealous, boastful, proud, or rude, keeping no records of wrong, never giving up. At this point, you may be saying, so what? Saying we need to persevere without bulldozing others is something most people believe is good, but what does this mean? If we are not careful, it is easy to fall into the trap of the book of Judges of everybody doing what is right in their own eyes. This brings me to a specific part in the history of Israel in Exodus chapter 17. But before we get to Exodus chapter 17, let's make sure we remember all that happened. In 7 to 11, we find the 10 plagues of Egypt. In chapter 12, we find that Israel is escaping Egypt. They have left Egypt and they are on their way to freedom. In chapters 12 and 13, we find the crossing of the Red Sea where they are now free from Egypt and the Egyptian army. Exodus 15 is when they encounter the oasis of Marah, where they find this bitter water. God transforms their bitterness, but He calls them to leave bitterness. Exodus 16 is when God brings manna and quail for the people. Exodus 17, the beginning of it, we find that God brought water from the rock. Remember, they're in the desert, and they have no water, and God provided for them. But then we get to Exodus 17, starting in verse 8. And it says, when the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill, holding the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired that he could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to set on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands. So his hands held steady until sunset. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. God is a God of order who calls us to specific roles and responsibilities. While Moses is essential to the success of Israel in fighting against the Amalekites, each one of us is called to participate in the mission that God has given us. Each role calls for sacrifice and submission. There's a temptation to use this battle and this story as a way to justify a common approach to ministry or even life. That is the approach we focus on being busy while few undertake the prayer responsibilities. In fact, oftentimes we tend to view prayer as the thing we do before we do the thing we want to do. So let me say that again. We often view prayer as the thing we do before we do the thing we want to do. What would it look like for you to act like Moses on behalf of others? Moses stood in the gap for Joshua and the soldiers. Standing in the gap is this old-time phrase we use for someone who intercedes to God on behalf of another person. There might be times God calls us to be Joshua or a soldier in the army. But no matter the situation, we must not confuse busyness with faithfulness. Because no amount of strategy, money, effort, or desire will be able to take the place of faithful obedience. Israel did not defeat the Amalekites because Joshua was a master of military strategy. They didn't defeat the Amalekites because Israel had better technology and weaponry. They didn't win because their soldiers were better or because they wanted to win more. Now, Israel defeated the Amalekites because Moses stood in the gap, because Aaron and Hur helped and supported, because Joshua led the army, and because the soldiers fought. Now, maybe this is an irrational fear, but when we focus on order so much, the order that God has called us, when we focus on that order so much, we can become disconnected. For instance, the soldiers and Moses might not value the responsibility the other played. Order is important, but obedience is far more important. But see, a difference between Exodus chapter 17 and today is that Israel had a tangible army. We don't have an enemy like the Amalekites standing in front of us. The Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians 6:12, "For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places." Instead of fighting against an enemy like the Amalekites, we are fighting against the schemes of Satan and our sinful desires. Although our enemy might be different than that of what Israel faced, our response must be the same. We can be like a cow, or we can be like a bison. The cow avoids and flees, drifts according to the wind, and allows itself to be submissively beaten down by the storm. The bison confronts the storm with intentionality and purpose without being swayed by the pressures of the storm. In this coming year, and in years to come, we will face storms. It's our choice on how we respond to them. Like Moses, Aaron, Hur, Joshua, and the Israelites, we have an enemy in front of us. We're not fighting against each other. We're not fighting against other churches. We're fighting against the schemes of Satan and our sinful desires. And let us not forget what is at stake. There are thousands of people in our communities that do not know Jesus. If we fight the wrong battle, we are like a cow drifting in the storm. And the result is that we will endure greater trials and we will miss opportunities to magnify the good news of Jesus. The enemy we are fighting is different than the Amalekites. But the God of Israel is the same God we serve today. Both the cow and the bison endure the difficulties of the storm. And both the cow and the bison have the same resources at their disposal. Confronting the trials of life is not about bulldozing the situation. It is about intentionally and purposely seeking the God we serve. In this coming year, I know the trials and difficulties will be difficult. I don't know what they will be, but I know we will face them. I do know that the only way we can overcome them is by running to Jesus. The alternative is to be swayed by the storm. God calls some to pray, some to support, some to lead, and some to serve. All are called. No exceptions. We are all called. We are called by the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are called by the same God as Moses. There will be times you might want to give up or give in. God calls us to stand on His faithfulness. So are you the cow that allows yourself to get caught in the storm and drift, or are you the bison that runs to the same God as Moses?